So what are the basic archetypes of AR? And this is best exemplified by just showing my teams off. A lot of the basic archetypes of AR can be broken into primarily 4, with subtypes between them. The most basic and probably easiest to perform, even with fundamental knowledge of AI, is a hit and run. The hit and run is exactly what it sounds like. You send your cav, usually, to take out a unit. They get danced, which is slot 2, and then they reposition out. And depending on the rest of your units, and depending on the AI, you do a combination of smiting, repositions, and move your units out. So, to show an example would be... I think an example is worth a million words. So don't take this too seriously, because again, this is just an example, and this is against my rematch farm team. But the basic idea, you send your unit in, you take out, you hit, and then you move all the way back out. So you do something like this. You reposition out, and you do usually other movements, like this, and then you wait for the AI to move in afterwards. That's the basic fundamental of what a hit and run is. The game audio, it's on mute. I'll turn it back on. I just didn't want to interfere with my talking. But yeah, that's the basic fundamental of what hit and run is. So at that point, you just kind of wait for the AI to kind of peg out. Obviously, don't take this too seriously, as I said before, because this is not how a real team would actually look like. But if the basic fundamental is hit the unit that you want to hit, and then wait for the units to get baited out, and then you follow up by actually taking out the units. In an ideal scenario, you actually want to kill one unit, and in a super ideal world, you want to take out a dancer if it's their single dancer. Dancers make things much harder to predict. Alright. So that's the first archetype. The second one would be the Vantage strat. There's different iterations of the Vantage strat. There's the melee CC Vantage. The melee Vantage, sorry. Then there's the close counter Vantage, which is typically Blade Tomes. And there are a couple of smaller, nicher archetypes, such as, well, my favorite would be the close counter Pain Vantage. And in certain scenarios, there's also the Dagger Vantage, which right now the strongest contender for that is Kranya, with Matthew, Saizo, Kagero, Broadleaf, Soph as maybe above the same, or maybe slightly worse than Kranya, depending on how your viewpoints on it are. Whether my opinion on them is positive or negative, I'm going to put that aside. But those are the strongest contenders for that. So to show you an example of what that kind of looks like, again, I'll show this as an example. So typically, you find a way to get into your Vantage range.
Okay.
There's two lines of thought you can think about this. There's the first, which is you hit into an enemy to activate your Vantage. The second line of thought is to try traps. Trying traps isn't something you can always do, but if you have the chance, you want to take it.
As long as there's treats, it will be done.
You can do this through repositions, you can do this through walking on it, you can do this through smiting.
Yes.
Depending on the map, whichever is easier.
Point me at the enemy.
Yes.
And then once you're confident that you're fine,
I will go.
you just end turn in front of them.
I can't believe it. Me?
And this is a perfect example of when you don't calc, when you just throw them out. But yeah, the basic idea is you want to throw them in and let them die. CC/DC Vantage all have their inherent weaknesses. There's none that's specifically better than the other. I would argue that during Astra, Ares is one of the better versions because he has a better matchup against Dressir. And most Dressirs don't run Hardy Bearing themselves. And he almost always one-shots every Dressir he fights. Unless they're running a really wonky build with maybe Sturdy Impact and Sturdy Blow and like a ton of HP. I can't think of a Dressir that survives once you have Bonfire up though. Anyway.
Yes. Understood.
A more proper execution would be, though, the other one I was explicitly talking about, would be you want to Vantage off by hitting your enemy.
Understood.
Yes.
I will go.
So, as I said, you can use your own enemy to your advantage. So he hits you, he brings you low, and at that point you just wait on everyone else to run into you and die.
There's no stopping me.
Typically I'm more of a fan of the more aggressive approach. It leaves more enemies low, and in Ares' case, since I run Quick Impulse, it gets him into his bonfire range. As you saw before, it makes a huge difference in actually fighting enemies such as Ninian, who'd be over here.
You would become my prey.
And I'll end turn again, just to show what happens with Ninian. Try to do it. First I'll have to actually get him back to Dragon Effectiveness though.
Point me at the enemy. Understood.
Okay.
Point me at the
So it goes from not killing. Let's say this was debuffed. It goes from not killing to actually killing because he has special up. And that makes a whole world of difference. I think primarily I like playing on the more aggressive side when playing with Blade Tomes, or any CC Vantage, or DC Vantage. I'm actually a bigger fan of running Vantage with dancers rather than with strict supports like Valoria, because I feel on a more typical team, to show you an example, you'll see a lot more hidden hardy bearings and anti-vantages in the back line, which means you're going to have to dig in. And by dig in, I mean you're going to have to take out units to get to your biggest threats for your sweep. So that's Vantage. Now, what I would call probably the most popular is Omega Tank. And I can show two different variations of it. There is variations which rely on typically just throwing their tank, giving them a bunch of stats with Corrin or any other support like Keaton. And there's other iterations which typically include a dancer to get them into position. I would say I'm a bigger fan of having both as a flex, because there's certain maps where you're going to want the dancer so you can get extra range, you can get an attack on a very big tank buster. But in the maps where it's important to have stats, you're going to really want stats. And no, I mean Kaden, because I think Kaden's a really good support. Keaton's not a support, unless he suddenly got his Refine and it gives a bunch of stats to units. And the most niche, I guess I can show off what a Omega Tank can look like. I can show how it shouldn't look. Also need to change up this to my actual team. So this is what an Omega Tank typically looks like. It's not a good idea against my team specifically, because Dragon, when I have Pursuer. But, generally speaking, this is what you're going to want. Just a bunch of stats. You want to end turn on defense tile. And then you want to just let all the units run into you. And just suicide themselves. Sure. Let me see. Alright. Let me find a good team to actually Omega Tank on. I guess I can go for a lower level map. Is this IP? No. Okay. Let's just throw this in.
Let's be on our way. Let's go.
What is your desire?
As long as there's treats.
And then you just throw your tank in. Obviously this is without DC and stuff right now. So he's gonna die. Or he should. Good example of not actually doing this. Try and do this on the fly. This is why I should have recordings and have teams ready. Alright, let me actually set this up so he's transformed.
Of course.
It will be done. Yes.
Separate units out. They attack.
You will not
They
win
get
this.
back. He heals up. Next unit pops in.
This old blood still boils.
So this is what an Omega tank strat typically looks like. No one can break through him, so it's an easy map.
My allies.
I would say on a basic level, this is the easiest to perform.
You will not win this.
And typically you're left with like maybe one or two dancers, which means the pots themselves are pretty easy to get to. So, on a fundamental level, this is definitely the easiest to perform. You don't have to do a lot of calculations early in the week. You can kind of cruise through a lot of teams because your tank has so much stats.
Goddess bless my steps.
And the units that you're fighting against just aren't ready to deal with a unit who has 51 defense,
All right.
plus his 4 from this,
Of course.
plus 4 more from this, plus 3 more from this. He gets a lot of stats. And it's super hard for them to break through. And since a lot of teams focus invariably on having hyper offense, their defense is almost nothing. So yeah, I think it's the easiest to perform, but it requires the most investment to do well. Because your tank needs to have a lot of attack to kill the units attacking you. They need a lot of defense so they can attack and survive after getting hit by like 4 or 5 units. And there's a ton of skill investment that goes into it. For example, my Kane has Special Fighter, Smoke, Soul, and Fierce Stance. And while not all of them are super premium, it is the little bits of time that go into it. And then you have to take into account the feather count for getting the fodder. You have to take into account the flowers that you have to put into him to get him more stats, as well as the orbs if you want to give him to high merges, which is needed because he needs more stats to perform well. Yeah, sure. This is another good example of an Omega tank. Constant healing between each combat. Low CD noontime so you can heal as many times as possible. Smoke to lower other people's attack who are going to be following up after you. And I also get rid of the weakness. And yeah, the stats do add up. Now, the most flashy and the most inconsistent is Galeforce. I would say this is more of a pocket strat for most people, at least if you're taking AR super seriously. I'm not going to go into exactly the weaknesses of Galeforce right now. That's going to be a point for later on. But I believe Galeforce is around the 4th and probably the most prone to error. The basic idea is you run in, you take out a unit, you take out another unit, and you take out another. So let's see if I can show it off.
What do you want? I see.
Time to feed.
That's funny. What is your desire? It will be done. Yes.
Typically, smite him in. You take out a unit. You get the Galeforce off. You get the second unit. Usually they're low enough that you can then dance this person, take out another unit, and then your secondary and tertiary supports can typically take another. And you're usually left like with 1 to 2 units left, which are usually the lowest threat units, which are the dancers. I'm sorry, the wedding's already been ruined. Yeah, I don't think you need to take out the whole, but you have to take out the big threats. I would say Galeforce is the most prone to variance. I'll go into why Galeforce is super good later on, but I'm more introducing right now what the different strats are. So again, the big strats: hit and run, Omega Tank, then Vantage, and around 4th is Galeforce. All of them have their pros and cons. If you're looking to invest into at least 1 or 2, I think hit and run is the lowest invest. Then Vantage is probably the second least invest. It has the lowest entry because all it needs is typically DC and then a bunch of feathers. While Omega Tank requires orbs, feathers, and a ton of team support. And Galeforce is probably the highest invest because you have to invest into multiple units, because each of your units matter. Unlike in the other 3, where typically it's a cinch pin of 2 units, typically speaking, in Galeforce, all your units matter. Alright, so that's that. Introducing the main. Now, I kind of already touched upon this because of the way I showed my teams out. In my opinion, I think it's very important to diversify. And what I mean by diversify is you want to use all of your team slots as efficiently as possible. You could, yes, you could in theory just be like, I really like hit and run. I'm going to put a hit and run in all my slots because hit and run is cool. So let's say I was like, this team's going to be a Brave Bow. This one's going to be Reinhardt. This one will be a staff. I could find a staff. Among Us. Oh. This will be my Pain hit and run. And this one's going to be my Bow hit and run. The flying one. And this one's going to be hit and run with 2 dancers. Obviously you could. The downside of that is by doing that, you're kind of putting all in into one specific strategy. And the thing is, different maps are invariably going to have different weaknesses. Some maps will have weaknesses because they left their dancer out, so you can hit and run it easily. Other maps will have a bunch of dancers, but really low damage. So in those cases, Omega Tank usually does better. Other maps are just going to have a bunch of strong units with 1 or 2 dancers, but they have forgotten to put Hardy Bearing, so CC Vantage / DC Vantage will wipe the floor with them. So as a general rule, I think it's more important to diversify your different teams rather than put all your eggs in one basket. So rather than just going all in into one strat, in my opinion, it's much more important to diversify, which is why, specifically, I have a team of basically every major strat that I described earlier. Because there are going to be times where K-Negus is going to wipe the map, as you showed earlier. There's going to be certain maps where Ares is going to wipe the map very easy. That does mean you do have to invest into different units, but I think for the headache you will save yourself in the long term, it is worth it.